Good evening, folks. This is your ticker guy from Niceville, Florida. Mr. Obama needs a new press secretary. Mr. Gibbs tried to go after Rick Santelli today. He did a rather poor job of acquitting himself. I thought I'd have a little fun with him because, quite frankly, I haven't seen something so ignorant come out of the White House press office my entire life. Let's go ahead and take the cheap shots because you just got to do it when it's made this easy and this obvious.
I think we left a few months ago the adage that if it was good for a derivatives trader, that it was good for Main Street.
Oh, really? You know, Mr. Gibbs, you ought to learn about where Mr. Santelli works. The derivatives trading that they do in the Chicago board over there is on a regulated exchange. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, regulates the transactions there. Those are not the derivatives that we have all had problems with during this economic crisis. Those derivatives are written over the counter. The distinction is that the CFTC actually makes sure that you have margin to back up the bets that you make, and you have to settle your account every day if you get a margin call. This is not true for these over-the-counter derivatives. They don't trade those on the exchange. What they do trade in the pit and in the immediate area where Mr. Santelli stands is interest rate contracts. What's the importance of those? Well, see, after your wonderful Treasury Secretary, Mr. Geithner, goes out and sells Treasury bonds, they trade in the market. Guess how we set the rate and the price on those things? In that pit. So since you like your paycheck, I suggest that you learn a little bit about the fact that without a liquid secondary market for those things, we have a little bit of a problem, including setting the rate, price, and managing to trade things like mortgages.
This plan helps those who have acted responsibly, played by the rules, and made their mortgage payments.
Well, you got one of those items right. You have to be current on your mortgage payments. But you know what? I got the plan right here. Nowhere in it does it say that the original note had to be written responsibly. Nowhere does it say that you had to be able to afford the mortgage payments when it was first originated. And oh, by the way, I can refinance an option arm. Those are those wonderful loans where I could go in and qualify on a stated income basis. Say I made $300,000 a year, buy a $600,000 or $700,000 or $800,000 or $900,000 house. I make $8 an hour at Walmart. Everybody lied all the way up and down the line. The people that processed the loan knew that I was lying. I got granted the loan anyway, and I was only able to make the payments as long as it stayed at the low initial rate. When it recasts, I'm not going to be able to make them. So as long as I get in under this plan before the recast happens and I go delinquent, I get refinanced. That is the definition of irresponsible borrowing and buying, and yet you're subsidizing it. Quit lying, sir.
And it is not going to help a lender who knowingly made a bad loan, and it is not going to help, as the president said in Phoenix, it is not going to help somebody who has long ago known they were in a house they couldn't afford.
That's just a total load of bull. It's right here. Again. You tell us we ought to read this thing? I have read it. Rick Santelli's read it too. He tore it up on television today. You know what? It still sucks. You know why it sucks? Because it does allow the refinancing of irresponsibly written mortgages. It does allow the refinancing of mortgages that were written by people and to people that knew full well that the person who took them out could not make the original payments on the agreed amortization schedule. There's nothing in here to verify that there was no fraud. There's nothing in here to verify that the loan was originally granted on reasonable terms. Nothing at all. The 228s, 327s are mostly gone, but all the Alt-A garbage that's blowing up now and is causing the largest degree of trouble is all eligible for refinance under this, and 99% of that, which is in trouble, that is in trouble because people could not afford the original notes. Nobody refinances a note that they can afford, right? Other than to take advantage of an interest rate drop. Hey, that's nice, but it's not an emergency and it's not a pending foreclosure.
This plan will help by the money that's invested in Freddie and Fannie will drive down mortgage rates for millions of Americans.
Oh, Fannie and Freddie, you mean the two hedge fund cum mortgage financiers that operated under the supposed government wing, filed false financial statements for several years, levered up 80 to 1, and then both detonated How many more hundreds of billions of dollars are we going to throw into those failed enterprises? You know, we are too scared to consolidate those things on the federal government's balance sheet officially, even though China is now complaining about the fact that those mortgage-backed securities don't have an explicit guarantee. Why is that? Because that's $5 trillion worth of debt. That is equal to the public float of the United States Treasury. That would drive up interest costs. So we're going to continue to play games with a black hole organization that hasn't been fixed, hasn't been reformed, that has unknown amounts of dangerous, exploding mortgages on its books, and instead of holding people to account for taking those things onto their books and writing them in the first place and putting people in jail for falsely inflating incomes, appraisals, and all of the other stuff that went into it, oh no, instead we're going to all refinance it and charge it off on the taxpayer.
This plan helps people that have been playing by the rules but can't get refinancing, get that refinancing so their home doesn't become foreclosed on.
I can get refinancing, sir, if I'm not underwater, but this plan blocks me from getting refinanced if I'm more than 5% underwater. If I can afford the payments on the original amortization schedule, I don't need to get refinanced at all. If I have a job, I don't need to get refinanced at all, assuming that I can pay. And if I don't have a job, I'm not going to be able to get refinanced under this plan. I need an income. So this does absolutely nothing for the people who are responsible because they're not the ones that are in trouble. No, it was the people who took on more debt than they could really afford.
That if you live in a home that's near one that's been foreclosed, your home value has likely dropped about 9%, which for the average home is about $20,000.
So instead of having a $20,000 hit to my house, I'm supposed to fork up a couple $100,000 so my neighbor who took out an option arm, which he could not afford, is able to spend the rest of his money on a boat, an Escalade sitting in his driveway, maybe a couple of Hummers, maybe some jet skis. Hey, you know, this is all wonderful, except for one small problem. I'm sitting over here, I'm making my payments because I took out a regular 30-year conforming mortgage. And guess what? If my neighbor had done that and had been able to afford it, he wouldn't need to refinance.
Every day when I come out here, I spend a little time reading, studying on the issues, asking people who are smarter than I am questions about those issues. I would encourage him to read the President's plan.
Mr. Santelli has read the President's plan, so have I. That's right here. As far as discussing things with people who are smarter than yourself, you need to do a lot more of it, sir. Mr. Gibbs, you have demonstrated conclusively that you don't know what in the hell you're talking about. Furthermore, you've made an absolute fool of yourself on national television and made a fool of the White House press office. I don't know what kind of clown game is being played out there in Washington, D.C. right now, but this is one of the most disgusting displays of hacksterism that I've seen in my entire life, and it is beneath the office of the President of the United States.
And understand that it will help millions of people, many of whom he knows. I'd be more than happy to have him come here and read it. I'd be happy to buy him a cup of coffee.
I'm quite sure that Mr. Santelli would prefer a cup of tea. Now, I'm sure he'll bring some extra bags for yourself and President Obama as well. Sir, we ought to solve some of these problems, but we don't solve them by laying off essentially taxes on the prudent to cover the sins of the imprudent. I have read your plan, as I have said. There's nothing in here that prevents somebody who took out a fraudulent loan, nor somebody who wrote a fraudulent loan from having that loan refinanced. There is no test to make sure that the original underwriting was sound, and there is no test to make sure that, in fact, those people could originally afford the house. In fact, the way this is written, it is explicitly targeted at those people who have too high of a debt-to-income ratio, and the only way that happens is if the loan was unsupportable and unable to be covered in the first instance. Mr. Gibbs, you're lying, and it is time for you to leave. You must resign.